Jordan Peterson suffers a serious addiction, recovers, and certain groups respond with disgusting commentary. I'm Marco Perry. Welcome to the Perry Platform. The CBC writes that Jordan Peterson seeks emergency drug detox treatment in Russia. You may have caught wind of this via some memes floating around the internet about the self-help guru who is faltering in his own regard now with a drug addiction. Now, there is some irony to that, but we should understand the context first before we judge too harshly here. Things really started to go downhill with Peterson and his mental health when it was revealed that his wife was suffering from a chronic illness. She was diagnosed with cancer to a severe degree. At a certain point, the distinct possibility of her passing away became a real thing, and to Jordan Peterson, it was overwhelming. To see a woman that he loved, who he built a life with, to suddenly just come to face with the mortality of her, to understand that there's a real possibility that she might die and he'd be left without her, it was crushing. It got to the point where Peterson was simply overwhelmed and he had to seek a drug treatment. At the same time, Peterson is no stranger to family health issues, as his daughter was suffering from some pretty serious illnesses of her own while she was growing up, and we're going to touch on that in a second. But sticking with the scenario at hand, Peterson, in response to his wife just dying in front of his eyes, was given benzodiazepines. I think that's what they're called. They're essentially a class of drug. They're effectively tranquilizers. They put you in a sedative state, and they create a sense of numbness. You can see why that would be desirable when you're coming face to face with some very crushing possibilities and potentials of scenarios that you're going through. When you're looking at the potential death of your spouse right in the face, you might not want to feel the emotions that are associated with that. Now, some users of these type of drugs experience what's called a paradoxical reaction, and that really describes a scenario where the intended outcome of a drug is reversed. If it's supposed to treat anxiety and it makes it worse instead, that is a paradoxical reaction, and it can happen with a wide variety of drugs, depending on the person's individual anatomy. So, these kinds of substances, the tranquilizers, have also been linked to an increased risk of suicide, and of course, you can find yourself addicted to them without even realizing it until it's too late. That sounds like what happened to Peterson based on the story. He was in a very dark place, and when that happens, when you're surrounded by darkness, you are likely to grasp at any stream of light that comes your way. If you see hope, whether it's in the form of a drug, a temporary escape, it becomes very appealing when your real life situation is just complete chaos. This probably happens more often than we care to realize. One thing that we have to note here is that Peterson is a human. So are we. He's vulnerable. Just because he's a self-help guru, a psychologist, doesn't mean he can't fall victim to these same types of problems that he tries to help others with. It's a very common thing, actually. We're pretty good at giving advice to other people, but when it comes to applying it to ourselves, it's a whole different ballgame. That's evident through this example here. So, Peterson spent months trying to get off the drugs, but he experienced massive withdrawals, and his daughter describes his behavior as incredible, endless, irresistible restlessness, bordering on panic, and he was in a constant state of that. So, he was trying to get better, but it felt like there was a barrier there that was stopping him, and every living moment of his life was basically a nightmare. Some people described it as a living hell. So, he began to get desperate. He felt like he was boxed into a corner, he was getting suicidal thoughts, he wanted a quick fix, and, as a result, he had to go to Russia to get some type of experimental treatment. He received it, and it was something that you couldn't get in North America. And that's likely due to whatever the treatment is and its controversial nature. I believe I heard some reports that it was something along the lines of inducing a coma to purge the system. You can see why something like that will be regarded as a more extreme measure, and in a place like Canada where regulation is a little more strict than other places, why it wouldn't be allowed. So, Russia, being a place where the laws are very different, maybe they're more open to experimental treatment, and Peterson felt like that was the only answer available to him. So, he went. And before we even move on, actually, this brings to mind something else, and it has to do with Peterson and his proclivity to going after solutions that may or may not be scientifically well-founded. Peterson is also an advocate for an all-meat diet, which has received a fair amount of criticism, which I think is justified. There isn't any literature backing up this kind of diet. There's a lot of fad meal plans out there, a lot of things that are just hoaxes, but I think the context surrounding that explains his rationale, and it kind of sheds light on the bigger picture of Peterson's flaws. So, what happened with his daughter, and this is what I alluded to before, she was going through these issues while she was a kid. I believe it was extreme arthritis or something along those lines, to the point of being unable to walk. She was having all these issues, and life was a living hell for her. Peterson, being a father of a daughter like that, was distraught. They couldn't figure out the answer, and he says that the doctors diagnosed it as something that they weren't even sure of how to treat. So they start doing their own type of analysis. They try to figure out what the best way is to handle the problem, and eventually they start looking into diet. So they remove everything from his daughter's diet except for meat. I think they started with chicken, and they noticed that the symptoms were actually receding. For some reason or another, there is no scientific proof for it. It was only anecdotal, but they noticed this pattern. Then they changed the chicken one time into beef or something, and now that is the entire diet that they still subscribe to. All they eat is beef, and apparently it helped her to recover. She's no longer sick. Now, we don't know for sure if it's the beef. It's more of a superstition type of belief system where they saw X happen because of Y, therefore they attribute everything to that variable, and they're just going with it. This is what happens, though, when you are in a desperate situation. When you see your loved one suffering, you are eager to cling on to any type of hope you can find. If it comes in the form of an all-meat diet and it looks like it's working, you're going to stick to that. You're not going to be playing games with the lives of people who you care about. And so Peterson, in an attempt to try and fix some of his own issues, and I would wager show support to his daughter, he joined that diet as well. Now, he says he hates it. He might not recommend it to people, but he sees some benefits to it that he's observing. As I said, there's no science to back it up, but it works for them. I think it's kind of crazy, a little bit extreme, but this is where things have led. Peterson and his family have been in situations where they face these dire realities, and they're quick to jump to a solution that they think will help them. In the first case, it was all meat diets, and now the second case, it was going to Russia for a questionable procedure. And that seems to have worked too. Maybe they're lucky. The daughter is reporting that it did help him. Now, once again, this is a testament to the fact that Peterson is simply a man, not a god. We are all susceptible to bias of one form or another. His is clearly on display. At the same time, Peterson has done much good for many people. Some dislike his political views, but that's not all he is. You can't just boil him down to that. He has an entire self-help series that has raised thousands of people out of despair and depression. He proclaims values of responsibility, and if people gave him more of a chance, they would see he's not the Antichrist. He's looking to help in a way that he sees fit, in a way that he deems appropriate, based on his prior life experiences. I have no doubt that he's trying to bring about some type of good. You may disagree with that. You might not think it's actually positive, but to me, it doesn't seem like a question of motivation at all. He's not out here conniving and scheming, trying to find a way to undermine the system. Now, last year, Peterson revealed that he's been suffering under the weight of public expectations, and his wife's health problems have compounded that. He actually started to break down. He was shaking in the interview, and you could see what was happening to him. The public was being extremely harsh, as they are to anyone in the public eye. He was going through family issues at that time too, and everything felt like it was crashing down around him. He had a tremendous amount of success, but that's not the only thing that matters to people. So, despite all of that, he still put out content. Of course, there is the profit motivation you can talk about if you want to be cynical, but to think that that encapsulates the entirety of his platform, I find untrue. There was a time where it wasn't clear that Peterson was going to develop a large following, and things like his job were continually put at risk. Despite that, he still persevered with his message. Profit wasn't a motivation back then, and now it may be, but I don't think it's the dominant factor in his decision-making criteria. So, after seeking this Russian treatment, Peterson is reportedly on the path to recovery now. His daughter said he's smiling again for the first time in months, and I wish him a quick return. What I found absolutely unacceptable, though, is the people who are actively cheerleading his personal destruction. The people who are happy this happened to him, and those who want him to continue to suffer to the worst possible degree. That is an appalling response, and it's sadly been somewhat common. On Twitter, people are channeling their inner hatred. On Reddit, you can see it too, and nearly anywhere you look online that's talking about the article, there are many people who are just hating. This is not an appropriate response in the least, and it's a testament to how far polarization has evolved. The fundamental reality is that what's happening here is not political. What's going on in Peterson's life is a human issue. He's suffering from one of the worst human scenarios imaginable. The foreseeable death of a loved one who luckily recovered, and the addiction to a drug that you didn't think was going to do that to you, and the rehab process. These are human experiences, things that anyone can suffer from, not tied to a political ideology, not something to be hated upon. When faced with the reality of mortality within your spouse, and it brought you to your knees, and the tranquilizers that you were taking destroyed you, you don't have to like his political views to feel sympathy for that. And at the very least, you don't have to be sympathetic, but don't say anything or remain neutral. To go the full 9 yards and actively slander him at his lowest point, it's inexcusable, and it illustrates the priorities of these people. They don't care about human feelings or interactions and whatnot. It's all about an agenda. Their political viewpoint is paramount to anything else. This is the wonders of intersectionality at play right here. You can't relate to people if they are not like you. There is no logical consistency here either. A lot of these people displaying utter distaste for Peterson are the types of people who would consider themselves compassionate and loving and fighters of justice. The question that I would ask them, though, is, do your values go out the window when you disagree with somebody? Is that the criteria for receiving your passion? Is it only available to your in-group? If so, it sounds a lot like tribalism to me. And if that's the case, I would wager that these people are not as compassionate as they have led themselves to believe. Then another example of this inconsistency is if you flip the situation around, how would they react? Let's say you take somebody who these haters revere, someone they really like. Replace that person with Peterson. Flip the scenario around, and what would happen if people were acting the way they are to someone who they like? I guarantee you they would be freaking out. They'd be causing a scene. They'd be saying, how insensitive, how could you do that? This right here, as I've said, is a human issue, but politics is seeping in to every aspect of our lives right now. When you can't feel for somebody who disagrees with you, that's a problem. Because, wake up call, everyone disagrees with you about something. Everyone is unique. You have experiences and thoughts, and that's a good thing. Instead of looking at that as simply thinking that difference isn't a bad thing, it's actually a proof of the freedom that we have cultivated. We may disagree here and there, but we still do have some things in common. They look at it as a major injustice, as something that has to be torn down and replaced. Now, I will grant that some views truly are heinous and they deserve to be condemned, but Peterson isn't one of those people. The narrative around him is just baffling to me. To describe him as a bringer of evil, a doomsayer, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't align with what he actually is. If you take a soundbite here and there and not try to understand him holistically, then maybe you'll come to that result. But it's not truthful. It's not accurate. It's a low resolution display of what's really going on behind the scenes. And I must put out too, if somebody I despised went through a similar ordeal, I would not be leaping up with joy. That's because I understand that politics is not paramount to everything. The way the system is operating right now seems to be dysfunctional to me. People can't even make that distinction. It's a war 24/7. If you feel like that, it's going to impact the ways in which you act. And then what happens after that? Things spiral out of control. Now, ironically, then we start to wonder why maniacs appear to be the only ones entering government and the political realm. It's because the field is so toxic that well-intentioned people are just saying, forget this. I'll be dragged through the coals regardless of my motivation by one group or another. For having an opinion, you're going to be torn apart. You have to simply cater to people if you want to be treated as a human. If you disagree and something bad happens to you, you're torn apart. Why would somebody want to be in a context like that? Where there is no such thing as privacy, where the public scrutiny gets to the point where you're having a panic attack on live TV, where it gets to the point where even the most tragic of things cannot bring people together, it's a recipe of just toxicity. The people who want to be in that are those who just care about power. Those who don't care about what the public thinks. Those who have a different agenda contrary to what the people are saying. Those who are shameless, because this whole shaming game only works if you can feel shame. And we're almost creating a Darwinian context here where we are selecting for people who don't care. We have weaponized this thing to the point of complete ineffectiveness. Do you know why Peterson had to take anxiety medication before this whole debacle here? Do you know why he was shaking in that interview? Why he's telling you his life has become so hard given this public spotlight? It's because he cares. It's because these things matter to him, and he's being torn apart because of them. Even at his lowest point, we cannot just unite and say we hope you get better. That is terrible. The very social fabric which we stand on is ripping apart without a clear solution in sight. Things are getting worse year after year. Polarization is ramping up. We're not seeing each other as citizens with a shared goal anymore. There is no shared values or a culture. People are dispersing into their in-groups and they're solidifying their beliefs. People are ramping up toxicity. They're fighting for themselves and their own agenda. They cannot deal in compassion anymore if you don't look like them or something like that. These are terrible notions to try and impart onto a populace. Notions that are going to bring us into a dark time if we don't find a way to deal with them. This has almost been similar to a childlike behavioral pattern, a reduction in the way we are able to sympathize with people and a way in which we can put politics aside for things that truly matter. I do feel that a national disaster were to occur, people wouldn't even be on the same page about that. There is no unity anymore. There's no open dialogue anymore. Classical liberal values which I espouse are being torn apart. Freedom of speech, the ability to disagree, the ability to build a nation based on freedom and mutual respect. We're not looking like that these days. It really is a priority issue. All of our goals are jumbled up. People aren't on the same page anymore. We don't understand each other. If tragedy can't unite factions, I don't know what will. So on that note, it now brings us to the end of our conversation for today. If you enjoyed the content, be sure to leave a review and share. That will help us grow. And you can find me on Twitter and Instagram @PerryPlatform. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you soon.